calculate when it was. I think 10 days ago, was the celebration of our spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, his arrival in a place called Butler, Pennsylvania. That's the first place Prabhupada stayed. You know about that? Prabhupada came from India. He didn't know anybody in America. He had a friend in India whose son was living in a place called Butler, Pennsylvania. It's a 2-hour drive from New Vrindavan. New Vrindavan's pretty much just near a small town, and Butler's a small town. And Prabhupada stayed there. Some of you may have seen pictures of Prabhupada staying there. He just came to America straight out of India, living in Vrindavan, didn't know anything about America. And we had a celebration. I happened to be in New Vrindavan at this time, and they had a celebration, and all the devotees went to Butler, Pennsylvania. So we had a little meeting at Prabhupada when he first came there, stayed. He couldn't stay in the house. I think he stayed for a day he came to the house, but there was no room for him. So he spent his day in the house, but he lived in the YMCA. So we met at the YMCA where Prabhupada stayed. We talked about Prabhupada. Then we did Sankirtan, Harinam, chanted down the street to the apartment where Prabhupada was going back and forth. He was cooking there. And so we must have walked down the same street that Prabhupada walked. And then we went to the apartment house. It's all abandoned. It's for sale. There's like 20 apartments there. And we went in front of that apartment. 111 something. I don't know. I forgot. 111 something, and there it is, 111. So we're doing Harinam, and there's a little boy about 3 years old, and he walks up to the apartment, and lo and behold, there's those little locks that the realtors use. It's on the door. They're selling the building, and lo and behold, the realtor did not close the door, and the door was open. So all 50 of us went in the apartment that Prabhupada stayed. And I was thinking, I don't want to go that day, it's too much trouble. And that was like the most amazing thing. We were in that apartment, we saw the pictures, I saw those pictures for like 50 years. And we got to go in the apartment where Prabhupada stayed. And we saw the bathroom where Prabhupada came in and took a bath, not in the bathtub, but on the floor. Just took a bucket and poured it on the bathroom floor like they do in India, because in India it's stone in the drain. This is a normal American bathroom. And the water was dripping into the living room. And he has washed his clothes and put them in the backyard and laid them out. So that was amazing. We got to see it. Hare Krishna. A once in a lifetime. Anyway. So, Vishaka said I should talk about Prabhupada. That's why I mentioned that. But as you said, Tuesday is the month of Kartik. That's a month that is very special. And whatever you do is magnified in that month. So we, Hare Krishna devotees, take vows, like do something extra that month. Like you could read a chapter of the Gita every day. That's one thing I do. You could make a vow, I won't eat any sweets. Of course, you should make a vow you can follow. I won't criticize anybody. That's probably impossible, but you could make that vow. I will chant Mahamantra more than I normally chant. I will give up something, I will do something. That's what we do this month. So if you would like to do something like that, you could think of what would be beneficial for you. Maybe I'll come to the temple every day, or I'll offer something to the temple, or I'll offer some service, something that you don't normally do. It's kind of like in Islam you have Ramadan. Is it called Ramadan? Yeah. You do austerity, you fast. So this is the month that you can do some austerity. And the purpose of doing austerity, making a sacrifice, is to make advancement spiritually. So that's what we do this month. And this is a month that we can be blessed. So you can think what you can do. It's really nice to give up something you like for Krishna. Give up something you like, but it's not good for you. So many things we like that aren't good for us. And there's so many things we like that are not good for our spiritual life. Right? So when you make a sacrifice, Krishna appreciates that there was something you like that you're not going to do. You're going to make an offering, a sacrifice for him. Just like you sacrifice to anybody. Maybe they need your help, and you sacrifice some time. You inconvenience yourself to do something. They appreciate it. So Kartik is something like that. You can make some sacrifice of something that may not be good for you, but you like it. Maybe you can make a sacrifice and not look at your smartphone until 9 a.m. Oh, Prabhu, that's impossible. I could never do that one. That's too difficult, too austere. Yeah. So you can think of something that's not so helpful, like that, right? Or you have some habit, it's an unhealthy habit. I'm not going to do it this month. So this is an impetus this month. So, about my spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, who is the founder of this movement, people often want to know, what was he like? What was it like to be with him? And I was interviewed for a movie that was done on Prabhupada, and they were asking me questions, and I said, you should ask us what we felt and how we were transformed. I think I said, you should ask how we were transformed in his presence. Because, as you know, everyone has a presence. Isn't it? Like whoever you're with, they have a presence. They uplift you, or they do nothing for you, or they upset you, or degrade you. Everyone has a presence. And Prabhupada's presence was very special because it's not every day that you meet somebody that has that level of consciousness, that emanates such a high level of spiritual consciousness. And when you're in the presence of someone who emanates that high level, you get affected by it. And the proof of that is that Srila Prabhupada came to New York after Butler. He went to New York to start a movement, and no one at that time in America had any idea, very few people had any idea what is Bhagavad Gita, what is Hinduism, who is Krishna, Shiva, nothing like that. Maybe a few hippies were starting to study, but the average person didn't know. And so Prabhupada's coming with nothing to show but himself. He has no movement. There's no other devotees with him. There's no temple. He can't show anything. All he could show is himself. But that was enough. So when people saw Prabhupada, if they were open to what he was teaching, his presence drastically changed them, changed their heart, and specifically changed their desires. So much so that people who had no connection with Krishna, when they saw Prabhupada, they developed a deep desire to serve Krishna. So many of you know that this movement was basically started by hippies. Those were the only people coming. It wasn't like, uptown people in Manhattan were coming. It was the lower east side. That's where all the hippies lived, and that was the market, and that's who Prabhupada got. And they said that when they saw Prabhupada, they said that they could see that what he had achieved in his own consciousness was exactly what they were trying to achieve through drugs, but they couldn't get it, neither could they stay there. And they'd look at him and say, he doesn't take drugs and he's higher than we are. We want to get that. Yeah. So they would look at him and think, what does he have? But they also, I don't think they also realized that by being in his presence, his love of Krishna, his love of God was infecting their heart. And so you take these people, imagine if Prabhupada came and no one adopted, no one took up his teaching, no one tried to practice it, there would be no Hare Krishna movement. It could not exist unless people took it up. Right? Because nothing, unless you get early adopters, there can't be a movement. You need, because those people adopted it and they went out and told other people who went out and told other people. And then you have to have people adopt it. So why would people, basically, literally, just off the street, why would they adopt a practice of bhakti? Not only adopt it, but these are hippies, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Oh, I need to kill my soul. And Prabhupada comes and says, no sex, drugs, or rock and roll. And they say, okay. Like, how did that happen? That's impossible. Like, would you had a friend and say, I'm going to bet on Swami Bhaktivedanta that he'll not make anyone a Krishna devotee. That would seem logical, wouldn't it? I wouldn't bet on it. He's coming. These are all hippies. He's going to tell the hippies, stop taking drugs. They take drugs for breakfast. They have new girlfriend every 3 weeks. And he's going to tell them, stop all that. And they did. Is that amazing? Like, how did that happen? It's because of his presence. You could say because of what he taught. I listened personally. I was present, I think, for like 120 lectures of Prabhupada. So I got to hear his lectures. But I can tell you, if someone else gave the same lecture, it would not have the same effect. Someone spoke those same words, because when he spoke, it was saturated with realization. And when Prabhupada said something, you felt it. You didn't just understand it, you could feel it. So what was happening was his Krishna consciousness was entering people's hearts, and it was changing their hearts. I remember as a young devotee, I began practicing bhakti when I was 19. And I remember sometimes feeling very, very strongly, I just want to be a pure devotee of Krishna. And this is like a few months after I joined. But that doesn't make sense, does it? I'm just off the street and now I just want to be a pure devotee and give my life to Krishna, surrender everything. Where did that come from? They came from Prabhupada's heart. And if you just had an open heart, his love would get in your heart and it would change it. So that's why I say, when you're interviewed about Prabhupada, at least one question should be, how did he change your heart? Like, what happened to you? And anyone who reads the history of how Prabhupada spread this movement will always be somewhat astonished and a bit confused. How is it that these young people gave so much of their life, gave up so much? Everybody asked that question to me. How is it that you dropped out of university? You gave up your future. How did you do that? This is the common question, right? Because most of you couldn't dream, you know. You finally got in university, you're here in America, you have so many opportunities, you couldn't dream of dropping out. So you say, well, why did you do that? You know what my answer is? My answer is, if you were there with Prabhupada and you saw him, you would have dropped out also. Because he would have changed. You would have fell so much in love with him that you would just want to serve him and serve his mission and spread Krishna consciousness all over the world. So it's not like we were special. It's just if you were there in his presence, in that environment, and he's here and said, I have a movement, will you help me? You'll say, yes, of course. And you'll make huge sacrifices because you have so much love, and he's injected so much love into your heart. So that's the power of a sadhu. That's the power of a pure devotee. Prabhupada did something else, which is very important. He is called Acharya. Acharya means one who teaches by his actions. He models everything he wants to teach. You know, George Harrison had met Srila Prabhupada many times. And he said, the thing that impressed me about Prabhupada is that whatever he taught in his books, he was that. There wasn't two different things. It's easy to teach, isn't it? I can say so many things. But to be what I teach, that's different. He said, Prabhupada was what he taught, and he was always the same. It wasn't like one time I visited him and he was completely different. He was always a model of what he taught. And that gave us so much faith in him. And it was such an example and such an inspiration for us. That he wouldn't ask us to do something that he wasn't going to do. He would always model what he was teaching. Another thing that was really interesting about him, especially his movement became very powerful. He came in 65, the movement officially started in 1966. He left the world in 1977. So really, it was maybe 11 years, but the first few years there wasn't much. So it was really more like 5 years. He left the world with 108 temples and some farms and restaurants. And something amazing, no matter how many followers he got, no matter how much money he had, no matter how much influence he had, he was always the same humble sadhu. Never, it wasn't, from the day he came on his humble beginning in 1965, living at a YMCA, washing his clothes in this apartment, I think it's 111 Sterling, washing his clothes in the bathtub, to the day he left with thousands and thousands of followers, 108 temples, he was the same person. He was never confused, overwhelmed, bewildered, influenced, degraded by anything that he had. He only used everything in service. And the interesting thing is, a pure devotee of Krishna, because he's realized no matter what happens, no matter what he gets, it doesn't move him from his realization that I'm just a tiny soul and I'm a servant of the servant of the servant of Krishna. That's his realization. I'm just a servant. So Prabhupada was always in the mood of serving. No matter what he got, no matter how much people gave him, his mood was always, let's give it back. So what an inspiration that was for us. Because the way this world works is it's very difficult when you get power to be humble. It's really easy to be humble when you have no power, when you're a nobody. You can be very humble, but when the nobody becomes somebody, that's really when you understand the character of a person. One of our great presidents in the United States, Abraham Lincoln, he said, you don't really test a man by adversity, you test him by giving him power. That's the biggest test. So Prabhupada had huge amounts of power. And he used to tell his disciples, I learn from you because I see how you're serving me, and then I think, oh, that's how I should serve my guru. I learned. So he said, I see you as my guru. Wow. I think that's quite amazing. There's so many gurus that are engaged in scandals. They try to hide it, but I went to Orissa about 15 years ago, and the government had just cracked down on bogus gurus. They were exposing and arresting them. practically every guru in Orissa left. Does any of you know about that? Yeah, the government decided to crack down. So many gurus left because of the scandals that they were hiding. Our government was fed up. This is quite common. You're a nobody, you become a somebody, you get power, it goes to your head, you use it to exploit. Prabhupada never did that. He only did that to serve. Beautiful, isn't it? Another really interesting thing that I found personally about him was that he was completely in control of his life. You know, you ever get busy and you have papers and stuff all over the house and everything's disorganized and your car's, you haven't had time to clean your car, you know, this, that, you know, having time to do your laundry and everything's scattered, you know, your house looks like a scattered brain. You ever been there, you know, where's my pen? I can't find it. Where did I leave my keys? You know. Prabhupada was the opposite of that. He was, no matter what happened, he was always in control of his environment. In fact, there's a beautiful picture of him. It's a beautiful, when am I supposed to stop? 5 minutes ago? 20 more minutes. We'll take some questions. There's a beautiful picture of him. He has a cane, and I think he's like kind of on his cane with his hand like that. And this smile, this super tranquil smile, I don't know how to describe it, because the way he smiled is like nobody else. Kind of like you're looking at someone you love, and very peaceful. And we later found out that was in the middle of a very chaotic situation at the airport. There was like problems with the flight and the visas and the passports and this, and the devotees are running around, calling, screaming, you know, and he's sitting there like that. That really personifies, in my experience, him, that he was so organized and so in control of everything. You know, they talk about time management. Time management is really just sense control. Controlling what you'll do when, what are the priorities, doing what you say you're going to do. So, his life was anything but chaotic. There might have been chaos in what he had to deal with, but his personal life was completely shanti, organized, peaceful. And I was with him, not in his room, well, maybe a little, in his room, at a time when there was great chaos going on in our movement. I didn't know what was going on. Nobody told me. I found out by reading his biography like 20 years later. It describes the time. Oh, I was there with him, and it describes what's going on. And I thought, wow, that was amazing. He was dealing with some problems and it was upsetting him, but he was shanti. He was just peaceful. You couldn't tell. He didn't let life push him around. He was always in control. And in fact, he did something amazing, which none of us have been able to figure out how he did it. He traveled the world 12 times. And sometimes he took long flights that go through many time zones. And wherever he had a daily schedule, he did the same thing every day. Exactly the same thing every day. And wherever he was in the world, when he would fly in, no matter jet lag and so many hours difference, he would just, whatever time it was there, he would just go right into his schedule. And all his servants were completely exhausted, jet lag, they had to sleep, and he would say, why are you sleeping? You know, we have work to do. And they said, jet lag, Prabhu. And jet lag, Prabhupada. He said, what is this jet lag? Prabhupada didn't even know jet lag. It was like, this is just my idea. Because he was self-realized, it seemed like no matter how his body was doing, he could kind of push it. He could just, you know, his body be tired, but now's not a good time to be tired, so we're not going to be tired. We're not going to allow the body to push me. And he was just like, it was crazy how much in control he was of his body. He was only sleeping 2 or 3 hours at night, and what to speak when he's flying. And to me, it just looked like he just would not let his body or mind deter him from what he wanted to do. He would not let the environment disturb him. He would not let the chaos around him make his personal life chaotic. It was always very sattvic, mode of goodness, very clean, very organized, very peaceful. So much so that one time, I don't know how old I was. I think maybe I was 21. And I was in charge of a temple. And so we were in San Francisco. That was where they had Rath Yatra festival. And so many devotees and temples came to that festival. And there was a meeting for temple presidents. So I was thinking, what's this meeting going to be like? You know, Prabhupada's running an international movement and he's inviting the temple presidents who were going to be at that festival. And so I started envisioning like a big desk, so many telephones, so many secretaries, you know, because if you're CEO of a big company, at least in those days, you had 2, 3 phones, you know, one phone for international, one for this, you know, one for your kids, everything, right? So we go in the room, and Prabhupada's sitting behind a desk, you know, not a desk, he's sitting behind a table on the ground. No phones, no secretaries, no chaos. And I'm looking at him and I'm thinking, how are you running this movement? There's no phones and chaos. If I try to do anything on this level, it's all phone calls and chaos, 24/7, you know? Go to bed looking at my phone, wake up looking at my phone. Prabhupada was amazing. He said, I don't like telephones. If there was an emergency, he would say, well, we'll solve it when I see you in 3 weeks. You know, that's how he wrote. Everything was by mail. No phones. He didn't like phones. He said, phone is a disturbance. I have my life. I don't want someone coming in from outside. Could you imagine what he would think of mobile phones now? He just kept this very sattvic environment. So we're in this meeting. I'm like, okay, what's going to go on in this meeting? And the whole meeting he was just telling us, you should go out and open more temples. You should go out and help people. This is our mission. There was no like strategic planning, no corporate bureaucracy. He's just inspiring us. That's what he did. He was just inspiring us. That's how he managed, through inspiration. And he told his leaders, you set an example, just like I'm setting an example. You set an example, and you inspire people, and you'll have no trouble managing, because everyone will be so inspired and so pure from following these practices that it'll be very easy to spread this movement. And that's how he did it, just through inspiration. You know, he traveled extensively after maybe 1971 or 72. He was traveling, stay a few days, a week max travel, you know. Very rarely would stay longer. And he said, I'm traveling to inspire my disciples. And that was one of his main missions, to inspire. And how did he inspire? All he had to do was show up. Just be there and smile. And, you know, we don't say that, you know, just because your guru has a nice smile, he's a real guru. But I can say, of course, Prabhupada taught us. He taught us. He gave us knowledge. But I can also say his smile was very powerful because it emanated love of Krishna. So I have a story. It's a really interesting story. You'll like this one. So we have our Rath Yatra festival. If you don't know, Rath Yatra is a festival where we take temple deities out. We have special deities. They're called Jagannath, like they have in Orissa, Jagannath Puri. And we take them out and we put them on a cart. You have Rath Yatra every year, so probably everybody knows. You take these chariots and you go down whatever street you go down. and everybody chants and like that. So in 1970, this is my first Rath Yatra, Prabhupada came to San Francisco. At that time, it was the only Rath Yatra in the world outside of Jagannath Puri. And Prabhupada did not come out at the beginning of the festival. He was driven out and he came to the middle of the festival. The festival was 6 hours. 6 hours we walked. To all of Golden Gate Park, it takes 6 hours from one end to the other, and the festival was 6 hours. Prabhupada came out in the middle, and by a stroke of mercy and grace and good fortune, when Prabhupada got out to see the deities, I was standing next to him. So he looked at he saw the deities and he bowed down on the street to Jagannath, which since that day I always do, bow down to Jagannath, even if it's on the street. Then he stood up to look at the deities, and I thought, here's my chance. I'm not going to look at the deities, I'm going to look at Prabhupada, because I want to see his face when he's looking at Krishna. In other words, if I were to write a book, I would say, I want to see the face of a person who's looking at the face of God. I want to look at the face of a person. What does that look like when he sees God? So Prabhupada's looking at Jagannath, and you could tell when he was looking at Jagannath that he was seeing Jagannath. You could see that. That face, that love. That was the face that made people devotees. They could see God, they could see love of God in his face. If you've seen pictures of Prabhupada, you can see that. Nobody looks like that. Nobody smiles like that. It's probably he's the most photogenic person that ever lived. It's just like, I look at these photos and I'm like, how could anybody look like that unless they're seeing God? So we're sitting with a person who's seeing God. And just by his presence, traveling temple to temple, just by his presence, he would inspire so many people to want to love Krishna and want to love him. And that's how this movement spread. And again, I will make this point. If you were there, you would have done the same thing. You would have given up everything. Said, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I have to do this. There's no movement, he wants it spread. I can be on the ground level of spreading this movement and get so much grace and mercy from him. That's how this movement spread, by his presence changing people's hearts. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Question? Yeah. So we have like how many minutes?
5 to 7.
5 to 7.
Any questions we can
What happens after that? Prasadam?
some announcements and then prasadam.
Okay.
A show of hands, and I'll pass the microphone.
I have to make an announcement before. I have some books here about chanting Japa, and about marriage, and about self-care, and about bhakti, and recordings of lectures and like that, if you're interested. If you missed the Japa retreat, we have books on Japa. You can come and check this out afterwards. Yes, questions?
Thank you.
I'll pass you the microphone.
Anybody has any question? Just show of hand. Oh, yeah.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you very much for sharing all your inspiration that you draw from Srila Prabhupada. The question is probably rather philosophical, but also practical. Based on your understanding and all your experience with Srila Prabhupada and afterwards, what do you think Srila Prabhupada would appreciate and value us, each and everyone, doing nowadays?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe some simple things or...
Well, thank you for that question. I can say for sure he appreciated anything anybody did. It was like any little thing anyone did to help him, to assist him, to help this movement, to do some service. He appreciated so much. And I have a story. So, There was one devotee who took sannyas. Sannyas is the renounced order of life. It's a vow you take. Most of you know. Mostly you take sannyas when you're older, after you retired. Prabhupada was giving sannyas to young men because sannyas means you're giving your life totally for the service of Krishna. But one sannyasi, after some years, was unable to do it. And he left the sannyas order and got married. And he was a little embarrassed that he did that. And finally, eventually he went to meet Srila Prabhupada, ashamed of what he did. And he said, Prabhupada, will you accept me back? And Prabhupada said, will you accept me back and can I do service? And Prabhupada said, of course I will accept you back. I am not God. I cannot spread this movement alone. Of course I will accept whatever service you can do, I will accept and I appreciate everything you already did. That was his mood. So whatever you can do, he appreciates. And he appreciates because Krishna appreciates. We don't always know. Does Krishna appreciate what we do? He does. For sure. Have no doubt. We were having a class, a seminar this weekend, and one of the highlights of the seminar was understanding how much Krishna wants us to go back to him. In fact, we read from Brihad Bhagavatamrita, a book, that Krishna is waiting for us. When will you come? Krishna is trying to push you, when will you come and wait? And when you go back, Krishna welcomes you and says, thank you for coming, I was waiting for you. So that's the God you're worshiping. Does he appreciate everything you do? 100%, of course. And that's the God Prabhupada's representing. Does he appreciate? Because Krishna appreciates, he appreciates. And so many times Prabhupada would say, thank you. Thank you for helping me. It's quite embarrassing when your spiritual master is thanking you because you want to say, thank you. He would say thank you so many times for helping me serve my spiritual master. So the answer is, anything you do, he would appreciate. And he would especially appreciate that you don't criticize anybody. And he would especially appreciate that you cooperate. That I can say for sure.
Hare Krishna. I have a question. You mentioned that Srila Prabhupada was never fazed by anything. He was always stable, not influenced by anybody. I am the opposite of this. I am influenced by everybody, everything, and weather is one thing, people around me another thing, my own mood is another thing, and there is no that kind of stability, that how to have that stability where you're not that much influenced by things, or how to protect yourself.
That's easy to answer. Just become transcendental. And then, because when you're transcendental, you're in total control of your mind and senses, emotions, everything. If you're not transcendental, then gradually. But the best advice I could give for you, and probably all of us are in a similar situation, is what Krishna says, practice tolerance. So just because you feel something doesn't mean you have to act on it. And that sometimes we make that mistake. How could I not act on it if I feel it? Right? Because usually you just do what you feel. You're angry, you yell. You're sad, you go lock yourself in the room. Isn't it? You're resentful, you don't want to talk to that person. You're hurt, and you don't like the person who hurt you. So what Krishna says is tolerate. And I'll give you some insight, which is really beautiful. I think The difference between a person advancing in spiritual life and one not is their ability to tolerate. So when you look at them, you think, oh, they're very advanced. But in most cases, they're very tolerant. So externally, they're not showing that they're upset. They're not acting it out because they've learned to tolerate and they've learned to control through tolerance. So, and Krishna talks about it all the time. He said, don't be disturbed by duality. Be steady. So, I think I could say something that will inspire you, that'll help you. There's a beautiful story of a devotee who was about 30 years ago, I guess she had cancer or something. Anyway, she was leaving her body and she was writing letters and giving instructions about dying. It's like, oh, I'm dying. I guess I could help other people die. I'm going through it, why not? So she said, dying is not difficult. It's just a question of tolerance. And then she said something so amazing. She said, if you can just practice tolerance in life, you'll have no trouble leaving your body. Wow. Isn't that amazing? You can just practice tolerance in this life. When it's time to leave your body, you have practiced tolerance your whole life. You're ready for it. And can you imagine what it's like to leave your body? You think, you get a little upset if someone says, I don't like you. Well, leaving our body is going to be worse, right? And if you practice tolerance now, at the time of death, you can do it. And also, learn to take shelter of the holy name. Because that's going to be the only thing we have when we're dying. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. If you've learned to take shelter in difficult times, to calm you down, to ground you, you'll be very grounded when you die because you have that as your center. That's the place you go when things are difficult. You go to the holy name, you take shelter. And you practice that all your life. When things are difficult, take shelter of the holy name. And when you're leaving your body, that will be your home. You say, it doesn't matter what's happening because that's my shelter. There I am. Before we transcend, we tolerate. That's the mantra. Hare Krishna.
Sorry, we are a little short of time.
Okay.
Okay, we'll take one.
If you have more questions, you can ask later. I'll just sit here and...
We'll keep it to 2 minutes, Prabhu. Just one last question from there.
All right. Okay.
Hare Krishna, thank you so much for your class. And I'm sorry, my question is not directly related to today's topic about Srila Prabhupada, so the topic was amazing. I was listening to Srimad Bhagavatam class you gave here in the temple around 2 days ago, and you mentioned about, you told about criticism, and that when criticism is here, is in us, it's not about people around us, they don't create criticism in us, but they just bring up what is already inside us. So could you please, and you also mentioned that it could be a good austerity for Kartika months. Could you please share some tips about how to overcome, because I have always problems with criticism. On the other hand, I want to do some more service. On the other hand, there is this problem that when you are involved in more service with devotees, you start to criticize if someone doesn't want what you expect him to do.
Did she take
Thank you.
Did she take up my 2 minutes time with the question? The point I made was, let's say you do something and it upsets me and I criticize you. The problem is not you. Of course, the problem may be what you did, but I don't have to be upset about it. I don't even have to notice it. I don't have to hold it against you, necessarily. So the problem is with me that I need to criticize you. So what happens when I criticize? What does it do for me if I criticize you? It puts me down. You know why? Because I'm putting you down. And if you put someone down, you go down with them. But I think it's putting me up. Because if I put you down, I look better than you. So we have to ask ourselves, why do I need to look better than this person? Like what is so sad about my life? What is so miserable about me that I get happiness by putting someone else down? That question we have to ask ourselves, like what's going on? Technically, aside from any psychological issue that's causing it, technically it's a manifestation of pride. It's because I'm proud that I do it. And when there's humility, there's appreciation. So what I would suggest to you, the best thing that you could do if you want to overcome criticism is just try to see something in everyone that you can appreciate and tell them. Because when you appreciate someone, it's a different consciousness. And when you appreciate, you will lose the desire to criticize because you'll be so satisfied appreciating you wouldn't want to criticize. And so as they say, if you want to overcome a bad habit, you have to replace it with a positive habit. What's the opposite of criticism? It's appreciation, it's service, it's glorification. We have this really interesting experience. We cook for the deities. I have this experience all the time. Many devotees have this experience. You go in the deity kitchen to cook and you're kind of hungry and you finish cooking and you're not hungry at all. You cook for Krishna and you got full. So if you honor, respect, praise, appreciate another person, sometimes that eliminates your own desire to want to be honored and appreciated. Your own desire to want to put somebody down, you feel satisfied. But the final answer to your question is, I have always felt, my first thing I think when I'm criticizing is something's wrong with me. There's something wrong inside of me. Something in my life is not right. That's why I'm criticizing. I'm frustrated with myself. I'm unhappy in some way. Maybe I'm not doing things I want to do. And maybe I see a person who's also not doing the very thing I want to do, and they remind me that I'm not doing it, and I get upset. So that's something to consider, because that happens a lot. We criticize the person who reminds us of our own faults. Yeah, Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Mahatma Prabhu, and for everyone for asking such good question. Once again, can you give a big round of applause to thank Mahatma Prabhu for being here with us this evening on a Sunday program.